Hello, I'm Chris Ossman, and this is Solutions. Enough complaining, let's fix America. Today, I'd like to discuss something I do believe has a great impact on what's going on in the world, something that people don't seem to realize does have an impact on things like George Floyd's case, the fact that during the pandemic, our Congress and our government in general was unable to help us get through it, giving us a one-time payment of $1,200 while giving trillions to the wealthy. So this is in the section of my book called Solutions, where I actually provide solutions to the things discussed in the two previous sections of the book. And this section is called Privatization. The Fallacy of Privatization, My Life as a Consultant. In the past few decades, the argument for privatization of practically every service normally run by public entities such as cities, counties, states, and even the federal government have been pushed by the Republican Party. The claim that private enterprises could do a better job for less has been a compelling one. So compelling that when presented to the public, there were few who questioned the logic or validity of such claims. And those who argued against things like charter schools, privately run prisons, and the construction of municipal facilities by private contractors were ignored, allowing all aspects of life to move closer to the private sector and the minority that controls it. Having worked in both the public and private sectors, I can honestly say that private contractors neither save money nor provide a better product in many cases. Sometimes the shortcomings of a contractors are only apparent in their failure to stay within a contract's budget. At other times, their failures are related to the very service they provide or the final product they produce. And then there are those times when neither of these criteria is fulfilled. Now, I must disclose that I can only speak to the issue of privatization as it relates to construction, because this is the field in which I have spent the majority of my career. I am a graduate of the University of Miami, where I received my bachelor's degree in electrical engineering. Since that time, I have been a projects engineer or field inspector for projects ranging from and involving wastewater treatment facilities, improvements to the addition of a new concourse and terminal at Miami International Airport, and more. Overall, my experience has been in both commercial and industrial construction, where I not only oversaw the quality of work for electrical installations, but work related to other disciplines like structural and civil. Basically, I have covered most aspects of construction in my many years as a consultant. I started out working as a public sector employee, but quickly moved over to the private side of my industry due to the vast difference in pay scale between these two options. What I've come to realize is that private construction contractors are no better than municipal construction divisions. As a matter of fact, I have come to my own conclusion that public sector construction divisions are actually better for whatever public entity they serve. The main reason for my assessment is that public construction services have a greater stake in whatever project they are working on than do private contractors. If public construction divisions don't get something right, they are still around to rectify any problems that may arise. For as long as the structure exists or the piece of equipment is needed, private companies do, on the other hand, Private companies, on the other hand, guarantee their equipment and their work for a finite amount of time. Sidebar, sometimes this finite amount of time might be 5 years that they have to guarantee that this equipment works. And in a lot of cases that I've seen where we've had to refurbish some equipment that was previously done by a private contractor, what has happened is just that their contract sunsetted, their guarantee, their liability for any equipment or anything that they provided had basically just ran out, and the on-site maintenance people were then responsible to try to get things repaired, and if they couldn't, another private contractor would be brought in and given a contract to build something or to rectify something or to fix something, and then only once again guaranteeing it for a certain number of years. So back to the book. As for craftsmanship, I have long since given up hope that the contractors I work with will provide the level of service they agreed upon in their contract. They have better lawyers and less respect for the client, while clients seem to have less will to enforce the contract specification these days. I personally have been on jobs where project managers have tried to encourage me to falsify documentation in order to keep the project moving forward. I've been on other projects where I was personally involved in the negotiation of change orders, which are a request for extra money outside of the scope of the contract, where my estimate was $227,000, while the final settlement was $1 million. Sidebar. So basically, I looked at the pay requests that the contractor was putting in, and I came up with a total of $227,000 as far as what they were due for that pay request. And then what happened was the head of this municipality went behind closed doors with just him and the owner of the construction company. His own project manager, this was a city, his own project manager wasn't allowed to go into this meeting. It was just the two of them. And like I said, I came up with $227,000 as the number they were supposed to get. The contractor had requested $1.5 million, and then they came out with a settlement of $1 million. And then this company, this city, this municipality, then later on down the road tried to backcharge my company for errors and omissions. And basically all they did was they just took my daily reports and showed the people in charge of the city every instance, and including the pay request that I provided them, every instance of when the contractor made a mistake and why the contractor shouldn't have got paid for certain things they were getting paid for. This is like if you have shoddy work. A contractor can do shoddy work or work that does not meet the specifications, and if they do that, then you reject it. They have to tear out the bad and put back in the good. And in this instance, there were some cases where they had to do these things 3 times, and they would charge a city each and every time when they were only supposed to charge them once. So sometimes they got paid 3 times for the same work, and you know, obviously they got it right the final time, but they shouldn't have got paid those extra 2 times. So in the sidebar, back to the book. I have also heard of projects where the contractor was kicked off the job for failure to perform, only to be brought back onto the same job to finish it. Sidebar, in that case, there was a contractor who basically the client eventually got him kicked off the job, and the contractor sued. They got paid their full amount for the original contract, and then the client couldn't find anybody else, so they brought back this contractor. And I don't necessarily believe that the work that was being done was something that only this contractor can do. There was something weird about it because it was a building. So, and there were other contractors that were working on the same project that could have fulfilled, you know, the needs of the client. Maybe there were some scheduling conflicts or something like that. But from what I saw, they got paid twice for doing the same work. The list goes on, but of all the disturbing things I witnessed as a consultant, the thing that is most discouraging to me, having to ask whether the project manager hiring would back me up when I pointed out a contractor's deficient work. While the answer to my query has always been yes, it is too often in theory only. In most of my personal experiences, when the time came for action, the boisterous and prideful claims of standing by their people fall by the wayside. Instead, what I witness in practice is the justification as to why the job had to keep moving, even when matters of health and safety were at stake. Though my story only relates to construction, it seems to be relevant in most areas where privatization has been touted as the best way to control costs for those services historically provided by public funding and public agencies. What I see in construction is cost overruns that seem to go unchecked by the very individual who should be looking out for the taxpayers' dollars. construction consultation that fails to control or assure the quality of work or service being provided, and an overall retreat from defending the client's rights. The client in these cases being taxpayers who fund these projects. Don't get me wrong, I have worked with some good consultants in my time, but I don't recall them being in the majority in my experience. As for other industries, how are charter schools faring against the public schools? Are they building a stronger America? Does it seem that charter schools are run any better, or that they are putting out students who are more prepared for life or college? Or, as I've read, are they simply finding more ways to maximize their profits while adding no increased value to their clients, the students? How are the private prisons that profit not only from the housing of so many nonviolent drug offenders, exorbitant fees for phone calls, and the outsourcing of near slave labor doing? Do you know who made your lingerie from Victoria's Secret? While some may argue that these prisoners should be made to work, they will have to ignore that this is modern day slavery because someone is profiting from their work. But it's not the prisoners and it's not society. Sidebar. When you go to prison, you owe a debt to society, not to some private corporation. Back to the book. Those who support such practices will also have to ignore the local businesses that have gone under because they could not compete with the near free labor that private prisons provide to private corporations. Lastly, these proponents would also have to justify the use of prison labor to eliminate jobs formerly filled by free citizens. In states like Wisconsin, governors like Scott Walker passed legislation that allowed him to lay off state employees in lieu of prison labor to lower costs. And private prison corporations don't limit themselves to adult or even domestic markets. They've branched out to youth detention centers and centers that incarcerate illegal immigrants. Justify it all you want, but it all leads to abusive practices. Should these prisons be profiting from the misery of immigrants who only seek to make a living here as opposed to their country of origin? In the case of Mexico, the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, made it impossible for Mexican corn farmers to compete with American corn farmers whose crops could be sold for less than the cost to grow them due to government subsidies. Should these people be demonized for something that unfair trade practices forces them into? And why aren't the American companies and individuals that hire these workers ever prosecuted? Off topic, I know. Sorry. My point is that one group of unfortunate people trying to eke out an existence should not be a means for corporations to further enrich themselves. And that is exactly what private prison corporations like CCA and the GEO Group have done and continue to do with our government's blessing. A sidebar, I think one of these private prison groups is gone, or they consolidated into one entity. The names might be changed, but the practices are the same, or worse by now. Back to the book. In the end, does it serve America's best interest to privatize everything, especially when the rhetoric doesn't correlate with the practical applications of such privatizations? Corporations are motivated solely by profit, and it feels as if the soul of our country is being compromised for profit. Now, this goes to what's going on with the police and everything, because these murders that are going around, and I do mean murders that the cops are committing, that they are committing them in service of a certain sector of society, and it's not the majority of the people in this country, because the majority of the people don't want the cops to just kill people and just to get away with murder every time they do so. So if that's not the will of the people, who are the police actually protecting? They're protecting money interests. And then you have, like, look at the attempts of with like, say, the military, where you have these private corporations like Blackwater, I think it was. They were trying to privatize our military. They were trying to push legislation which would allow them to get a foothold into the military, where they would do certain activities, like maybe support activities. But once you start down that slippery slope, they will continue to push for more and more of their access to more and more federal dollars for the military. So these are some of the things that I'll go along with the privatization and the protection of the private interest and the protection of profits over people. That's what's going on right now. When we have leaders that are telling us that we have to go back to work, they're telling us to protect those people who are going to make the most money, because they're not protecting the individuals. They have these commercials from Amazon that talk about essential workers, these commercials from all these other companies that talk about essential workers as being heroes. And that's true. They are heroes, but they're not completely represented by these corporations like Amazon and Walmart, because in their historically, Amazon and Walmart, they have treated their employees not just bad, but they've actually treated them negatively, to the point where it's like they have physically and in some cases done more harm to the employees and basically shorten their lifespan. And I'm not saying this in like any scientific manner, but think about it. If they say stress does shorten people's lifespans. And if you work in jobs where you're so stressed out that you can't even take a bathroom break, or you have to carry a pee bottle to deliver goods, there's something wrong with that picture. If you work for Amazon, you know that historically they've had the instance where instead of putting air conditioners in their warehouses, which get extremely hot, they would just simply have EMTs stationed outside. So in case you had a heat stroke or something like that, you could just be rushed to the hospital because it was cheaper to have an EMT than to install air conditioners. So that's not a very proactive way to look at the health and safety of your employees. And they did the same thing with COVID-19. They fired a guy for trying to warn people that they were working next to people that had tested positive for COVID-19. And now all of a sudden Amazon has these commercials talking about, yeah, we're providing masks, we're providing sanitizer, all this other stuff. But they would never have provided that stuff if it hadn't become an issue. So, as another side note, what we've seen around the world with the privatization of all these public entities is that they don't work. You've had countries where leaders, through greed, have sold off like the water treatment plants to private corporations, and basically the citizens of those small nations have had to completely kick out these private corporations because they were doing nothing but raising the cost of water, and they weren't really providing any more benefit to the people. They were actually just trying to extract the wealth from those people of that country. So ultimately, there are certain things that should not be private. Things that, like prisons, should not be private. Healthcare should not be private. I mean, you can have the doctors that have private practices, but the monetary side of healthcare should not be private, because the driving motivation for healthcare should not be a profit motivation. It should not be greed. So education, it should not be private, because you're going to get a bunch of private companies that will look to extracting as much wealth as they can out of the education system while providing the minimum of education to the students. Whatever is going to be cheapest is going to be what's going to be provided for all these agencies. So people need to realize that privatization only is there to further extract the wealth from the majority and give it to a minority. And that's one reason why I wanted to read this excerpt from my book, because we don't need more privatization. Well, that's solutions. Enough complaining. Let's fix America. I hope you got some insight into this. I hope you do some of your own research. But please join me again for another episode. Thank you.